All right. Well, so excited that everybody is here today. So Jason and I actually just met a few days ago, but I'd like to think we became fast friends because I think one thing that's unique about this fireside chat today is actually one head of East Coast sales interviewing another. So I head up the East Coast sales over at Branch, which we do cross-channel, cross-platform, deep linking, and attribution, and Jason over at Nextdoor. So do keep that in mind as we go through the fireside chat today. And just in terms of the conversation, we have a few questions, but please, we want to make this super, super interactive. So I have my tablet here so I can field your questions. And I think we're going to kick things off by kind of jumping into intros, talking about when it makes sense to hire a sales person or a sales manager. Jump into, of course, the fun subject of hiring, onboarding, ramping up, and then jumping into actually creating the sales engine itself and best practices around there. So to kick things off, Jason, I think most people here at this point are pretty familiar with Nextdoor, but Sure. If you don't mind, what does Nextdoor do, and what's the primary challenge or problem that you guys are looking to solve today?
Sure. Everyone hear me? Cool. So Nextdoor is the essential local app for neighbors. So our members go on the platform to get recommendations from their neighbors around who's a great plumber in this area, who is the best internet service provider, who knows when the local Ruby Tuesday is going to reopen after having renovations. They go on to connect with their neighbors online and offline. Public agencies actually work with Nextdoor, and they can push out notifications. So a week ago when we had the heat wave in New York City, the New York City Health Department pushed out a notification to me, I live in Stuyvesant Town, saying, hey, health advisory in New York City, hydrate, stay indoors as best you can. So it's a utility app. The mission for Nextdoor, especially in a world where today people suffer from loneliness, depression, isolation, an opportunity for people to connect online with people close to them in proximity to then meet up online and feel that human connection again. That has been somewhat lost with the rise of social media and people spending more time online in general.
Got it. It's almost going backwards.
Yeah.
Now, let's dig a little bit more into your background.
Sure.
So prior to joining Nextdoor, you were at a little company called AOL, which then became Oath, and
Yep.
most recently became Verizon Media Group. What teams and sales did you oversee over at Oath? And what did you learn from building and managing the sales teams over there?
Sure. So I joined AOL in 2013. AOL was acquired by Verizon in 2015. And then in 2017, Verizon acquired Yahoo. They made a combined company called Oath. And then they rebranded Oath in January, I want to say, of this year to Verizon Media Group. There were a lot of sales teams that you could imagine at Oath, Verizon Media, just because they had different content brands like HuffPost, TechCrunch, Engadget, Yahoo Sports, Yahoo News, Yahoo Finance, and a lot of sales teams associated with all of those. I was on the advertising technology sales team selling the demand-side platform. A demand-side platform, also known as a DSP, is a piece of technology that can buy advertising across the web and on our site. So I had half of the East Coast DSP sales team. We were verticalized, so I had the retail, tech, auto, and travel verticals. So these are advertisers ranging from Verizon and Comcast to Volkswagen, Kohl's, and Universal Orlando. And the way we were structured was that my direct reports would work alongside a field seller, and the field seller sold AOL owned and operated inventory. So the TechCrunch, Engadget sponsorships, homepage takeovers, while my team was focused on the programmatic side of the buy. It was nice because content is more of an upper funnel branding and awareness strategy, whereas the ad tech solution was more of a mid to lower funnel strategy. So if you think about the marketing funnel of awareness, consideration, and then obviously hoping someone will purchase your product when it comes to media, that's how our teams worked together.
Got it. Now, I've worked at large companies. I've worked at Salesforce.com beforehand, and I remember the days of working on specific verticals and even having specific zip codes. I imagine, Nextdoor has been around for about 9 years, but like many tech companies, freemium model where, the last 3 years is where you've really focused on monetizing the platform.
Yes.
And I'm sure as you're interviewing for this role, they made you do a 30, 60, 90-day plan, which is pretty standard when you're, interviewing for sales management. So I'm curious, especially, coming from such a large company like AOL
Yeah.
and moving to Nextdoor, what did that plan look like?
When you transition from and I worked at a smaller company before. I used to work at AppNexus, which is now called Xandr, and it's owned by AT&T. I joined there when we had about maybe 270 employees. So I had worked in a smaller startup-y type company before, but I was entry level in an account management role. When interviewing for Nextdoor for the head of East Coast sales role, I'm big on reading business and professional development books. There's this book called The First 90 Days. It's by Michael Watkins. I don't know if anyone here has ever read it, but it's a book that has strategies for getting up to speed quickly and in a very efficient way when you're making a major transition with your career. So it has different pillars and things you should try to do between days 0 to 30, 30 to 60, and 60 to 90. So I put together my 30, 60, 90 for my role at Nextdoor as the head of East Coast. And mind you, I went to Nextdoor 6 months ago. So we already had an East Coast sales team. The head of East Coast went to go run the U.S. sales team. So I inherited 3 salespeople. I had 2 open headcounts. And then I currently have still 3 account managers and 1 account management manager. So that's what the team's landscape looks like in case anyone's wondering. And I was tasked with putting together this 30, 60, 90 plan. But I didn't have any real information about the company and how they're doing things. So I put together a 30, 60, 90 just around how I would think about a sales team. I ended up probably sticking with, I don't know, probably 20% of it.
Be my next
Yeah,
question.
I stuck with 20%.
How did you execute against that?
Not well, just because, you get to a place, and one thing that the book that I told you about, First 90 Days, mentions is you have to come into a new company with an open mind, and you can't think whatever made you successful or made your sales team successful within the circumstances of your current role will be the same steps and systems you should put in place to make the new team successful. So during my first 30 days at Nextdoor, I spent time learning and asking a lot of questions. So trying to figure out the company's history, my sales team's history, the product from a member standpoint, the product from an advertising technology standpoint, understanding the different systems and tools my salespeople would use when an RFP comes in or when they need to send an IO. Not because an IO is an insertion order. Those systems and tools, even though I may not be using them day to day as a sales manager or sales leader, it's good for me to know the situation that my salespeople are in so I can better relate to them as their manager and better escalate the things they think are going well as pain points. So first 0 to 30 days, learning, asking a ton of questions, just because I'm a big believer in the philosophy that you can only be new at a company once. So you probably have, your first 6 months, I think, to ask any questions. I don't think any question's a stupid question at all. And obviously writing everything down, because a lot of information is going to come your way. And even though things may not make sense initially, as long as you're writing things down, you can refer back to your notes, and hopefully they make sense. So first 30 days, it's funny because maybe a weekend, once I got the story down, I made this email of what the Nextdoor offering was, and I blasted it out to 100 of my former clients from past roles to say, hey, don't know if you knew this, I'm at Nextdoor. Wanted you to know about our platform, hyperlocal advertising, national scale, the whole pitch. Are you available to meet in the next 3 weeks? Because I figured in that time, I will have perfected the pitch and be able to actually pitch them on the platform, but I should at least lay the groundwork then. And then the last thing I did in the first 30 days was I actually had a client meeting my second day with Hearts and Science, which is the media agency for AT&T. So talk about being, tossed into the deep end. But that was definitely a great experience. Days 30 to 60 was around developing my talent. Actually, before I started, one thing I forgot that's very important is getting to know my team. So I came in with 7 people reporting into me. None of them know me. And I'm sure that's pretty intimidating when this guy that was your boss now moves on to the head of U.S. sales. How do you connect with this new person. So it started with informal coffees, sitting down, asking them questions about their life, their background, getting to know them on a human level, but then ask them questions around Nextdoor, the things they like, the things they don't like, why did they choose a career in sales, where do they see their career going, et cetera. Days 30 to 60, we're more focused on operationalizing the team, looking at the account list, figuring out how we could restructure the team to make people more efficient, and to better align their sales skills with their book of business, meeting with engineering and product to figure out what the roadmaps look like, and then days 60 to 90. In the book, first 90 days. In your first 90 days, you need to secure wins early. So I made 2 hires as salespeople, which was great because we needed, the people on my team had very limited bandwidth, so hired 2 salespeople, which was very exciting. And I also rolled out this thing just because I'm very big on professional development. These employee development plans and this thing called StrengthsFinder 2.0. StrengthsFinder 2.0 is an assessment that people can fill out around, you just answer questions on a scale of like, this sounds like me versus this sounds like me, and you can put anything in the center. And the output is that it lets you know, it doesn't focus on your weaknesses, but it gives you your top strengths, and obviously the ones at the bottom are the things that you're probably not as strong at. So I did that to give my team confidence in their strengths and also let them know, focus on your strengths, make those stronger, let's focus on positivity, as well as employee development plans, just to figure out, as an employee, when you think about your perceived strengths and weaknesses, I want to know what those are. What motivates you? How are you best incentivized? But then even more so, where do you see your career in 2 years versus 6 years versus 6 months? Because you might have an account manager who wants to become a salesperson, who wants to become an account management manager, or who's actually just fine being an account manager. I want to know what their career path is so I can make sure I'm putting them on projects that best align with what they want to get out of their career, to help them develop. Same for salespeople.
Definitely, yeah. We actually use strength finders at Branch as well. And I think another benefit from that is you realize what teams you should create and how people should partner with each other when somebody's really strong here, but maybe they have a weakness here, finding somebody and matching them with somebody who has a strength in a different area as well.
Yep.
And one thing that I love that you said is it's really, I think that, the first 90 days, what's hypercritical is building that credibility, that trust with your sales team from the get-go.
For sure.
Now, a question from the audience, and funny enough, one that I had on here as well. So obviously at most startups, the founders are typically the first salespeople, right? But as the company grows, it makes sense for founders to focus in on other areas. So from your standpoint, when do you think is the proper moment? What are the signals that you look for when you think, hey, it's time for the founders to relinquish some of the sales responsibilities, either to the first salesperson hire, whether it's an individual contributor or somebody who's an experienced salesperson? I know personally at Branch, it came with, our company is based on in the Silicon Valley, and it was opening up, our first remote office, which was New York, and running a sales team out of here because there was so much opportunity here. So that was a signal for us. Curious to hear from your standpoint.
Yeah, so this is strictly my opinion because I only joined Nextdoor 6 months ago, and the ad sales team was formed about 3 years ago. The first salesperson was actually the first East Coast salesperson was based in Atlanta. The first West Coast salesperson was based in our headquarters, San Francisco. I think the point at which you start building a sales team relies mostly on the founders. And number one, how good of a salesperson or salespeople are the founders? If the founders are fire salespeople, and if they have time that's best spent selling versus speaking to investors, hiring engineers, and things like that, then I think that the founders should continue to sell. I would probably recommend that the first few sales hires probably serve as consultants that are going alongside the founders, because let's be honest, the founders are most passionate about the product that's being built or the service or offering, and that passion should likely flow through, but the salespeople are skilled at selling if you hire a good salesperson. So I support when founders hire their first salespeople that are consultants that are paid on a percentage of deal size that they bring in, mostly commission-based, and then based on that, build out a more formal compensation structure, because I also have the belief that hiring is hard, and if you make bad hires, especially early on, in a company's life cycle, it could be pretty traumatic because you either have to wear or own this hire and figure out how to make it work, or you then are letting people go, which happens, but you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. So if you have a person that's working as a consultant who knows that they're on somewhat of a temporary contract, but has the opportunity to show their worth, bring in revenue, I think that that's the best route. But as you start to build out a product that is serving its purpose, and there are a lot of deals coming in, it does make sense to have a more formalized sales team that has a compensation structure that is more stable. And by more stable, I mean salaried, base salary, and then a back-end commission that fluctuates or that is based on revenue goal attainment.
Yeah, and typically, do you think you're focused more at seed startups on quarterly goals versus annual numbers?
Those annual numbers trickle down to quarterly numbers just to make it a shorter timeline for the sales teams, from what I've seen. But I mean, I don't know. How about you? I feel like this is a tough question. I want to hear.
You're gonna turn it on me.
I have to do that now.
So on the flip side, my background is more in traditional SaaS sales. And so branch we're a SaaS model. Typically at SaaS companies, I think most OTEs I see are 50-50 split between base and commission. And then when you start talking about what is a salesperson's annual quota, you're looking at a multiplier of their OTE. I've seen anywhere from 3 to 7x, depending on the size, the market, the growth of the company. So that's typically the rule of thumb that you see on the SaaS side. Now, Jason, flipping it right back to you. So, you talked about hiring, and I think, at seed startups, it's a competitive environment, whether it's in the Silicon Valley or in New York, to hire talented tech salespeople. You're competing with other high-growth startups.
Sure.
You're also, competing against some of the biggest giants out there. And so when you are dealing with, name recognition, I mean, I feel like everybody knows Nextdoor now, probably was an issue, a few years ago, probably not anymore. But when you're dealing with less name brand recognition, leaner pockets, what is the dream that you're selling in the hiring process to the salespeople beyond just, compensation and a brand name?
Sure. So I use the same reasons why I went to Nextdoor. So obviously being passionate about the company's mission and the work they're trying to do in the world. Number two, I like working at companies that have strong leadership. Sarah Fryer is our CEO. She joined in December. She's previously the CFO that took Square public. She's worked at Salesforce. She's worked at McKinsey. She's worked at Goldman Sachs. She's on the board for Slack. She's on the board for Walmart. I mean, she is an extremely accomplished leader. She's great to work for, and she is extremely talented. So when you see someone like that come to Nextdoor as the CEO, I think that is a statement in itself. The chief revenue officer of Nextdoor is Lauren Nemeth. She has worked, the past 3 companies she's worked at have been acquired, which is a nice thing to see. So I think leadership obviously is a thing that stands out, as well as the mission. But then number 3, I think there are a lot of people who work at these larger behemoth companies that are smart, who work hard, who want to be challenged, but they feel like a cog in a wheel and like they can't see the direct efforts of their work, versus at a startup company where it's smaller, you have less resources, your hands are in a lot of different pots, and you are the ultimate accountable person. That feels good versus if you're in an organization with 3 different sales teams covering the same account, and now people are fighting over who drove revenue. At a startup like Nextdoor and like many of the others that are in this room, I'm sure, you are the person on these accounts as a salesperson. And I think that definitely means a lot for people that want to really learn and grow and develop as salespeople.
Definitely. And on the flip side, when you're actually interviewing people, one of my favorite questions I love to ask other sales managers is, what are the 3 top attributes that you look for in rockstar salespeople? And as a second follow-up to that, I think most salespeople are really good at selling, and they better be good at selling themselves. Yeah. So what kind of stress tests do you put in the interview process to ensure that those key attributes are actually in place?
When it comes to vetting candidates and their resume, one thing that I look for is extremely detailed, results-oriented points. So if someone says they grew revenue every quarter, that's not helpful to me. You're a salesperson, you should be growing revenue. And plus, I don't know if the revenue that you grew was at benchmark or below benchmark. So if someone said, exceeded my sales target by 10% on average, and then said, by, and explained why they were able to do that, by selling innovative product, by tailoring the product that we had to client needs, by having a summit with the CMO, which opened up the opportunity to X, Y, and Z, but really showing the work that you did, because if someone's resume just says they grew revenue, I don't know if they actually grew revenue by being a strategic salesperson, or if revenue just fell into their lap, or if their account manager or someone else on that team helped influence the revenue. So I look for that in terms of the resume. I also look at if someone's taking risks as a salesperson, and if they are putting themselves out there and being passionate about the client and their business and their work in the way that a consultative salesperson should be. Your second part of the question was about the questions that I ask candidates. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually a very tough interviewer, just because, number one, my first job was in finance on Wall Street, and it was a very tough environment, and those interviews were very stressful, but I do think they do serve a purpose outside of just tormenting the person.
So this is just a walk in the park.
On the other, well, I mean, I just think it's important in the interview to really get questions answered, especially when you're interviewing salespeople. If a salesperson's a good salesperson, they should be able to sell themselves. And once you hire them, they're on your team, So you have to really know what you are getting yourself into. So the question that I ask every candidate, whether it's sales or not, is the final question is, what are the top 5 reasons why you're the best candidate for this role? And it's interesting because a few times I've gotten answers like, wow, I'm not really used to talking about myself. And I'm thinking, well, if you can't pitch yourself, which you should know better than this product that you're not even selling yet, how can I have full confidence that you can sell it? And for the things that the person lists, I don't really care what they say. There are some things that I care about, but it's more of a self-awareness test, because if someone's going to be on my sales team, I need them to be self-aware and to know what they're good at and how they can add value. And if they don't know themselves, that's going to be very challenging if you have to give them feedback and help them develop. So things that I care about, accountability. We're at a small company. There are not a lot of resources. So I would not enjoy having a salesperson on my team that had that's not my job attitude, because at a small company where you're lean and you're strapped for resources, everything's your job. So I think that's something that's very important. A person that's strategic as a salesperson, I don't really think, and this isn't hating on any relationship salespeople out there, I think it's great to have a relationship and to get drinks and bond with your clients. I think that's very important. But if you can't clearly ask the right questions to understand what your client's needs are and how to match those needs to the proper product that you're selling, because at Nextdoor we have a few different ad products, but if you sell in the wrong ad product and now the client says, well, this product doesn't work, I don't want to work with this company again, now we're probably in the box and can't give them a call for at least a year. So a strategic salesperson is extremely important to me, and also just an organized salesperson that has good sales hygiene, so that knows how to manage their pipeline of deals that are coming in, that knows how to, forecast out the revenue they plan to get, manage booked revenue, and have superior client service. Because if you're at a startup, your product in some ways is probably inferior to the product that the behemoths have. It's probably differentiated, which is why you have a business, which is awesome. But overall, there's probably something out there that is meeting a need for a client. So what can you do to combat that? Have superior client service. So what does that mean? Timely email follow-ups after client meetings, clear next steps after you come out of meetings, being quick when it comes to replying to clients, and doing everything you can to make their job easier. And I think that goes a long way with clients, and that makes them want to work with you because they understand that you care about their business.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to your point about self-awareness, I think one thing that I've learned from years of managing is self-awareness is not something that's coachable, period. And one of the things that we do at Branch is the last step of the interview process, and we also do put people through the ringer, is we actually have people do a technical presentation on Branch. And we know that's tough. We give them the right resources and, make sure that they have access to the team beforehand. But the reason being is, one, we want to obviously test their technical aptitude, their sales skills, but it also shows, the grind, the hustle, the grit, like how much time and effort have they actually put into this.
Yeah.
We will test their resourcefulness, like beyond just the website. Are they actually leveraging the folks that they've met in their interview process or a customer that they might know that uses branch? And then once the presentation is over, we actually do live feedback on the spot to see, how they take feedback to test that coachability
I
gene.
might steal that from you. I like that.
And then, but even before we give feedback on the spot, we actually ask them what their thoughts were to test that self-awareness. How do you think you did in the presentation?
I think that's right. Yeah, I mean, we don't. I'm probably an outlier in terms of the intensity of the interviews that I have. But I mean, I think at the same time, there's no perfect salesperson. I'm not a perfect salesperson. I'm not a perfect sales manager, and I don't expect to hire perfection. Some people are A+ pitchers. Some people pitch at a C+. That doesn't mean they can't be a great salesperson. I care about hustle, I care about drive, I care about accountability, organization, and things like that. And even if someone, misses the mark in a few places, I think they could still be successful at a company.
Yeah, for sure. Now, switching gears a little bit. So when you think about, the sales machine, there's basically like 3 key cogs in any sales org. The 3 things are basically 1, how do you make the average deal size bigger? 2, how do you shorten the sales cycle? And 3, as you hire new reps, how do you actually get them to ramp faster?
Yeah.
So I wanted to switch gears, talk a little bit more about onboarding.
Yeah.
So how do you ensure that your new hires are actually onboarded and ramped up as quickly as possible?
Yep.
And how do you make sure they're set up for success?
Just because I had to do a lot of hiring after I started, I created a document that's broken out into a few different sections that just walks them through what they need to know to be successful in their job. For the first week that a employee starts at Nextdoor, we actually send them to our headquarters in San Francisco so they can meet the leadership, meet product, meet engineering, meet the ad operations team there, other sales teams, other account managers, and get the feel for the company. Here in New York, we have a smaller office. It has grown a lot actually this year, but we used to be in a WeWork on 8th Avenue and 36th Street. Now we have our own space on 21st and 6th, and there's about 20 of us. And even though we have a great vibe, it feels good to go to headquarters and really feel that energy there and see the leaders walking around. In terms of their actual development, I have almost daily one-on-ones with them just to see how things are going and make sure they're coming along well. I mentioned those employee development plans earlier. If there is, which there have been people on my team that want to move into leadership, actually match them up with the new hire as their new hire buddy, because then that person on the team gets to train and work those muscles in terms of coaching and training and developing talent, fielding questions and being that resource, even though that's not all managing a team is about. It is one aspect of it that is important. Away from that, I let them know that they can ask any question. If they don't feel comfortable asking me, ask their buddy. Write down questions, write down everything, have a Google sheet, and put questions in it. And if you want to come to me at any point, let me know. We also, for my one-on-ones on my team, we have this Google document that we share, and it has certain things in it like open weighted pipeline, booked revenue, your goal, and other MBOs and things like that they should be tracking towards, and then anything else that's on their mind. So then before the one-on-one, I don't step into a situation where they ask me a question that I don't have an answer to. We can make the most of that time because we both have put different topics in the sheet that we wanted answers to. So even though the one-on-one is something that I do with all my employees, I think it's important, and I have that same type of system for new hires just so they can feel like there's a constant feedback loop. But during new hire training, there's Salesforce.com training just because that's what we use for managing revenue and client contacts and managing pipelines. There's training on inventory tools, and I don't want to bore everyone here with the different systems, but essentially we make sure that they're capable of the job from the tech aspect as well as the sales aspect. I have each of my new hires watch the Nextdoor pitch of at least 3 employees, and then at the end of their third week, they pitch me. And I give them feedback on their pitch to help them develop. But they shadow, the new hire shadows other account managers and salespeople on their client meetings that are over the phone, status calls, pitches, and everything, just so they can figure out what they should be doing and also what they shouldn't be doing. I think it's important for salespeople to build out their own style and not just become clones of the other salespeople in the organization.
Definitely. And you mentioned Salesforce.com, and that's a perfect segue into a question from the audience. So obviously part of enabling salespeople and empowering them is your sales tech stack.
Yep.
So other than Salesforce.com, I mean, there's so many tools out there that allow people to ramp up quickly as well as make them more efficient and effective when they're actually fully ramped sellers. So can you tell us a little bit more about what's in your sales tech stack?
Yeah, sure. So first, if you have to think about the sales cycle, the first thing you need to do is research your clients and who you actually want to go after. So all of my salespeople have a book of business, but obviously some of those accounts within the book of business have a higher priority than others in terms of revenue. So I have them prioritize their account list. Obviously, I'm overseeing it to make sure it actually makes sense, which it usually does. But then from there, if they get their account list and their priority, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 of accounts, obviously their time spent on those accounts should be prioritized towards tier 1 and tier 2, probably less so for tier 3. The next is researching the clients and outreach. So there's different tools like SellerCrowd, Winmo, and others, which you can go into, put in your client's name at the agency and at the brand, and then get a list of email addresses, names, etc. So getting those contacts so you can do your outreach. I think outreach is very important just because clients are very busy. They get not 1 million, but a ton of emails every day. So why would they care to even open your email? So hello from Nextdoor, I don't really think is a compelling subject line for an email. I like a good clickbaity subject line to make the marketer sit there and think, oh, wow, like this is interesting. I want to open this email. So if you did some research, let's say you used Pathmatics to see which type of ad creative that advertiser has out on the web. I know whenever one of my clients or any advertiser on the East Coast, if I'm on any other social platform and I see an ad, I screenshot it and I email it to the sales team or to the salesperson on it to let them know what their clients are doing in case they didn't get served the ad. So that's when you're talking about prospecting and outreach and making sure the outreach email is effective. Beyond that, obviously, Salesforce is used for tracking leads, open-weighted pipeline, and then where you are in the sales process for those deals so you can manage the deal and also the revenue expectation. Marking deals as closed won, closed loss is very important, especially if the deal's closed loss, because if we didn't get the deal, we need to understand why. Was it product fit? Was it that all the budget went to one publisher? Like, what was the reason? Because based on that, we can best iterate and figure out if we need to change anything with our product or our sales process to make sure we're landing more deals. So I think that that's important.
What does your partnership look like with your sales operations team? Because that Salesforce data is only as good as what your salespeople put in it, but then what do you do with that data with your sales operations?
The sales ops team is outstanding. They built so many great dashboards that my sales team can easily go into and figure out how they're pacing towards revenue and what they can do to close it. We actually did an exercise on my team this last week. They did the work. We went over it this week where we pretty much went line by line with their account list every quarter. Salespeople put in their bottoms ups, and we've done this at every organization I've been at, where you say, hey, this is my book of business, and this is where I think I'm going to come in for Q3. So you have your gut, which is where you think you're going to land, your low, meaning if things fall through, where are you going to come in on the low end? Yep. And then your high, which is stars align, everything's great, and you get all the money you need, or that you thought you would ever get. So from there, we took their booked revenue, open-weighted pipe, and then the gap between that and their high, just because we're overachievers at Nextdoor, to figure out what we can do to close that gap. So if there are deals that you thought you were going to win that you haven't won or that you did not win, well, now we have to take that, factor that out, and figure out what other accounts can you go to close the gap. I'm of the belief that it's much easier to grow revenue with an account that's already live and working with us than sending out a cold email to a client that's never spoken to us before and expect you're going to get $250,000 or $1 million in quarter, because it's probably not going to happen. The quarter's probably already planned out, even though there are different brands that have a shorter timeline and can quickly churn out budgets. if you are performing. So that's one of the exercises that I do with my team to make sure we have an accurate look, especially since, I mean, if everything's in Salesforce, that's one thing, but sitting down as a sales manager, I can't just say to my team, all right, like, why isn't revenue higher? Why aren't you closer to goal? Or why aren't you beating goal more so than you are? Because every salesperson wants to hit goal, wants to beat goal, and wants to get paid. As mentioned earlier, there are many companies that offer accelerators over 100% to goal so that you are incentivized to get that kicker, because then a multiple is applied to your commission. So that being said, I think those types of strategies are very helpful. Another thing that I do, since I've been in the industry for a while, is, I will sit down if my clients, or my direct reports say, I'm not getting any traction with this client. Great. Let's do a LinkedIn exercise, pop names in the LinkedIn, figure out if we have mutual connections or if I'm connected to them, and send out a note to get meetings. We've done that a lot, and it's been pretty successful. I encourage all my sales people to friend each other on LinkedIn, because with working at different agencies and publishers, you're probably only 1 degree away from that key contact, and I'm sure that mutual contact wouldn't mind doing a intro.
Definitely. I think LinkedIn is an absolute necessity for salespeople. We use Sales Navigator. There's a great function within it called Team Link. So beyond just your connections, you can actually see who's connected from within your company, which is a great place to start. And then I think another tool that we use is called Course. It basically records all your sales calls. And what's great is it's a wonderful onboarding tool, because literally when people are onboarding, they might not be able to join every single sales call, but they have a library and they can see who the top salespeople are and start listening to all their sales calls and their pitches without having to do it live.
I just thought of two cool tools. So one, I think it's Salesforce. They have a cool plugin into your mail client where you can see when mail recipients open your email.
Right.
So I would know, let's just say I'm sending you an email. I know when you opened it, if you opened it or if you didn't open it, how many times you opened it, which can be an indicator to you being interested or not. Also, ClearSlide has the functionality for you to see, once you take a deck or a presentation that you pitch to a client, you put it in ClearSlide, you send it. You can see how many times it's been opened. You can see how long people have spent on certain slides. So let's just say the deck has 5 slides, but a lot of people at the organization you sent it to are spending a lot of time on slide 3. That's a great time to send a follow-up note if you haven't heard back in, let's say, a week, to say, hey, if you'd like more information on, just wondering if you curious, want to know more about this one topic, here's more details on that. So I found that to be an effective strategy. And you can also see if that presentation was forwarded to other people within the organization, which can help you learn about other people that you may not be connected to, but are still relevant to the business, obviously, because it's being sent to them. So
Yeah, I would also highly recommend, I think LinkedIn, it's obviously a free platform. That is something when we have a pre-sales checklist every time before we have a meeting with a customer that our team goes through. And there's so much valuable information on LinkedIn as to, what's this person's background? What are your mutual connections? What are some icebreakers that you can actually use in these conversations? And beyond that, there's tons of free information out there. Check out the person's Twitter. Google, do a Google News search about what's happening lately. Look at their press releases. There's so much free information out there. And the better armed you are with information before you meet your customers, the more impressed they'll be and the more that they'll want to work with you and realize how much you want to work with them. Now, going back to compensation a little bit. So I know we talked about kind of the basics of compensation, but as we mentioned, startup sales can be lumpy. It can be tough.
Yeah.
So especially when, sales are low, what, spiffs or incentives do you think can be put into place to help drive the morale and help that situation?
This may not be a popular answer, but if it's a young organization and there's not a lot of sales revenue, I'm thinking the incentive should be selling so you can keep your job, right? I'm being honest, because I think that there are spiffs that come into larger organizations that I've seen where if there's a certain product that's not getting much traction, they may put a spiff or accelerator or incentive around selling a certain product, or maybe it's let's say the company has 2 products, one has a higher margin than the other, and there's a higher volume of the lower margin product, but the organization wants to sell more of the higher margin product. I've seen spiffs or incentives get placed around that type of product, or having a seller or upselling a client into more products. I've seen that kind of spiff. But if a company's in its very early stages, I'm assuming there aren't many products for them to sell. Revenue is key. So if you have to incentivize salespeople to sell, I just feel like I'm missing something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of the times it's revenue and obviously closed deals, that seems so far away. It just seems like a light at the end of the tunnel. So I think if you think about the metrics that help feed that pipeline, so I know when we're looking at pipeline, we're like, hey, typically you want like a 4 to 5x multiplier of what you need to close in the quarter walking into that quarter.
Oh, yes, of course.
And so, I think setting spiffs around, in the past, we've done spiffs around pipeline creation. One that we did, we saw in-person meetings really moves the needle and helps shorten the sales cycle. So, in a month and a half period, which salesperson can do the most in-person meetings. Our sales team actually next week, just to help build some pipeline for Q4 as well as start thinking about 2020 is doing a competition around, first meetings with new accounts that we haven't been able to break around. I think those are just like off the top of my head.
So in that way then, walking into the quarter, having booked revenue at 50% of goal is one of them. The other one is having and there's a lot of different math based on how you're looking at it, having an open weighted pipe that is like of X percent of your goal. We, at Nextdoor at least, have had a few things. We're doing this major outreach push where we're just going to have call it a 3-hour window where we all just sit around, order pizza, and just hammer out prospecting outreach emails. We're not necessarily doing a spiff around it. We did do a competition around the best prospecting outreach email. But when I'm thinking of spiff, and sorry for being on a different page, I was thinking a very direct revenue booster. But I mean, if it's a $100 gift card or something like that to help incentivize, and that's of course encouraged.
Yeah, I think we did one last quarter where it was for the Dyson hair dryer, which is a very pricey item.
Sure it is.
And then a question from the audience too is, do you at Nextdoor, do you actually comp deals differently based on how they were sourced? So is something driven by marketing comped differently than a lead that was maybe sourced by an AE themselves?
No, because every salesperson has a book of business, but then if there's an account that's not covered, you're very welcome to run after it. We also have a sales development representative who can take inbound leads, but whether a deal comes from the SDR versus your book of business and you just finally broke an account that never worked with us before, or then lastly, you just thought, oh, hey, by the way, I used to cover X brand at my last job. I see no one's covering. I'm going to give them a call, and you close the deal. Revenue's revenue. You're paid.
Right. Yeah, I would actually totally agree too. At the end of the day, you want your internal teams aligned. And so let's say there's a scenario where an AE gets a lead that's inbound, but they're going to get paid out on a lead that they generate themselves more. All of a sudden, they're focusing their attention more on their own, lead-driven deals. You don't want that to be the factor. You want them to be working the best deal, the deal that's going to close ultimately at the end of the day. So I think you have to think a lot about internal alignment and making sure that everybody's set up to win and to succeed.
Correct.
Yep. So you mentioned this earlier. At a startup, most AEs are wearing a lot of different hats. You're the account manager. You are your own SDR. You are maybe sometimes your own technical support to the customer. How is it set up at Nextdoor today, and how do you see that progress as a company matures?
Sure, that's a good one. So, pipeline management, generation, and closing net new deals, that's the sales team's responsibility. For clients that are already live with us, let's just say Q2 into Q3, the account management team is focused on renewals, upsells, and just general account management and health. So that means looking at the performance of a buy, making sure you're having weekly, if necessary, check-in calls with the client to share performance feedback and hear if there's anything else we should be working on. From a pricing and yield standpoint, that actually lives in operations. There's a totally different team that sets the pricing for our products. If there is a certain deal that the salesperson believes an exception should be made to get the deal done, they can send the deal to deal review. which is when a lot of the organizational leaders across operations and sales sit down to figure out if the deal should be done or not. I feel like there was a part that I missed on that.
Well, I'm curious. So, you have your AEs who are wearing
Yep.
a lot of different hats.
Yep.
And then you get the green light to hire the next team.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
it the SDR team? Is it the account management team?
Yeah.
What is the next team that you build upon afterwards?
Yeah, we'll probably hire like a client service team or like a sales planning team, because my sellers today, they are going into the inventory forecasting tool to forecast how much inventory is available for certain deals. They are obviously putting everything in a Salesforce as they should be, and as they logging their meetings and things like that, just because good Salesforce hygiene is important. I would think that outside of having today account management, ad operations, which is key and vital, sales, I think probably two things. Number one would be a sales planner that could handle when there's a major influx of RFPs coming in, help take the weight off of the salespeople from doing the RFPs, because I want the salespeople actually going out and closing net new deals. So that would be, if I had one role that could be hired, it would be for that, just because the sales planner should be able to handle RFPs. Obviously, the sales person, an AM, account manager, would be a part of that conversation, but I'm very, very, very much of the belief that salespeople should be out in market, having client meetings, getting feedback internally for product and engineering, and then also making sure you're doing what's necessary to assess if the client is a fit and figure out how we can close the deal, or deprioritizing that client so we can focus on relevant opportunities.
Yeah. And since we're back on the topic of hiring, I thought this was a good question from the audience. So you're at a Series A company. You're hiring your first 5 salespeople. What is the mix of seasoned vets versus that green pasture, those moldable folks?
Yeah,
Right out of college.
Yeah, I think a successful sales team is a diverse sales team in terms of background. If everyone had the same exact background and the same exact skills, then I don't think that the sales team would work together, even from learning from each other. For a sales team like the one you mentioned, I think that it is important to have, and of course I don't want to base anything off of generalizations, but I think it's important to have a seasoned salesperson that can help the more green people and mold them into become stronger salespeople. Of course, that's the role of the sales manager, but the people to your left and your right are influencing you more so than that. I would say you have 5 people, 2 seasoned vets, 2 middle of the road, like seasoned enough, and then I'd take 1 green person. I don't think you want to have too many green people, just because I don't think you should probably spend too much time teaching the seller how to sell. Mm-hmm. And I think once someone has had a few sales roles under their belt, they can move a lot more quickly, and I wouldn't want the green person to hold everyone else back for their own development, but I also wouldn't want that person to be isolated and all alone and feel like they're floundering at a company. So I do think it's important to have some younger, moldable folks in there, just because I think that energy is good for a sales organization, and that hustle and that passion and that difference of opinion, because I think with some salespeople that have been doing sales for a long time, they may be stuck or used to a certain way of selling. And I think if you're going to connect with all types of clients, then you need a sales team that reflects what all clients look like, and all clients are not very seasoned. There are more junior people there.
Yeah, and I'm totally in agreement there. And even when you're looking at your first 5 sales hires, especially at a startup, look for people who want to do. They are okay with doing things every day that are outside the scope of their job, because their job is realistically not just going to be closing deals or trying to find leads. It's going to be. I remember when we started the branch office, it was literally like going to our mobile growth meetups and hosting them and running them, right? Like, yeah. You have to wear so many different hats, and you have to care enough that you want to do that and see that long-term downstream that it's going to have an impact on the company. Now let's shift a little bit more into revenue. So curious, sure. What is the revenue model over at Nextdoor? And in terms of health metrics, like what are the key metrics you focus in order to ensure that you're creating a repeatable, predictable, and scalable sales engine?
Yep. When you say what is the revenue model, what exactly does that mean?
So I think you guys are we're SaaS-based. You guys are primarily ad sales?
Yep. Got it. So yeah, the sales model is based on insertion orders for managed service advertising buys. We have three major revenue streams or business lines for revenue. Number one is sponsored posts. So sponsored posts is a sponsored ad unit that just shows up in feed along with the user-generated content that your neighbors are posting. That's the standard ad unit via ad sales. We have a real estate offering where local real estate brokers, I'm not on that team, by the way, so if there's a follow-up question, I won't be that helpful, but you can post your real estate listings as a broker so people within the area can see what homes are listed. And then the final business is local. It's also called offers. And this is where the local businesses in your community can push out deals to the community. So let's just say you live in the East Village and there is a Mexican restaurant that wants to push out a deal to neighbors saying, hey, it's Taco Tuesday, dollar tacos every Tuesday, and you only want people in your neighborhood to see that, they can push that out. So those are the three revenue streams. In terms of revenue health, we obviously have our sales goals that we need to hit, and now I'm just speaking about the sponsored post organization that I'm within. We have our sales goals that we need to hit, so revenue health is based on, there are some clients from an advertising standpoint, insertion orders can be monthly, they can be quarterly. So when you think about Q3, so to speak, I need my sellers who have clients that don't have quarterly IOs, because if it's a quarterly IO, you put the whole thing in, and obviously, hopefully we're getting incremental revenue on top of that based on performance. But if there's someone who's monthly, then I need them to go into Salesforce, and for the months of, July, August, and September, you might only have July's insertion order, but I need you to put in a placeholder for what you think August and September looks like, just because it gives us a more full picture of the revenue to expect versus you waiting until the insertion order comes in and now there's this big spike in your booked revenue, but it wasn't really reflected in your open weighted pipeline, because that's what we go by to see health. There's also those two.
Okay.
Perfect.
Great. And just to provide some context on the SaaS side, I think obviously, revenue is the end all be all, but what is in your pipeline? Typically in SaaS, you look for a 4 to 5x multiplier of what you need to close in that quarter. We also look at things like, average deal size, average deal cycle. Obviously want the former to go up and the latter to go down. I think another healthy metric is also in SaaS looking at the average deal, the actual contract length. So, obviously in SaaS, most contracts are annual, but if you can actually make that, 24 months, as like the starting point or 36 months, locking up that revenue for as long as possible is a very key metric that we keep a focus on as well. And then more on the post-sale side, retention, churn rates, et cetera.
Yeah, agree on a retention, renewal, upsell, and churn, obviously, because if an organization, does net new revenue in a quarter of, let's just say, $5 million, but then has $5 million in churn, you have a real problem that should probably look into, why the clients are churning, just because you want to reduce the churn rate, obviously, and increase the renewal and upsell rate.
Great. All right, so this is an interesting question, and good for any founders in the room here today. So what are some misconceptions or unrealistic goals that you think founders often have about the sales cycle, about sales reps?
It depends on the organization. I mean, I can't speak for Nextdoor in this way, just because I was not there during like the early days of the sales team. But I mean, it depends on what your organization, how your organization's set up. A lot of tech companies are engineering and product led, and in those organizations, the product is perfect, the product is fine. Why aren't sales there? The sales team may not be a good sales team. This is all hypothetical. Versus an organization that may be sales-led could be, wow, our sellers are outstanding. The reason why we're not closing deals is the product isn't meeting clients' needs or it's inferior to X, Y, or Z competitors' product. So it varies from place to place. I think at the end of the day, especially as an organization grows, call them the founders, the leadership, if it's a larger company, may not understand how siloed companies can get when they get to a certain size. And even though the founders have a good high level view of everything going on in the organization, as these organizations grow, it's hard to stay on top of, every single new innovation or update, integration, partnership that's happening within the company. And without that, selling is more easier said than done. Also, the competitive landscape is pretty tough. I mean, you hear about the duopoly or, other large organizations that may have a foothold in a particular industry. It's hard to break that up because if you think about brands and advertisers, as much as they want to innovate and do things differently, it's also very easy to keep doing what seems to be working, even though testing a new partner could make things better, potentially could not. And you'll see that more often than not. It's easy for companies, whether it's in marketing or any other field, stick to what they know.
Got it. And what advice would you have for founders in this room today in terms of, starting your sales team based on, your own learnings as managing a sales team, maybe some mistakes that you've made or things that you wish you would have done differently?
Yeah, I would think, obviously, I hope the founders are being very smart about every hire. And hiring for the right things based on that founder's skill set and the vision you believe for your organization. I think culture is very, 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 very important at startups, and you want to make sure everyone that's there is excited to be there, is fired up every day. I've never been one of the people that gets the Sunday scaries or like anxiety on Sunday nights before work. I've always been very happy to go everywhere that I've worked. But you want everyone on your team, whether it's sales or another department, to want to be there and want to be fired up, because the last thing you want at a small organization is negativity or people that complain about certain things. So let's just say, oh man, like we lost this deal, it sucks being at a smaller company. You came to a smaller company. Like, what did you think was going to happen? You know what I mean? So I think that you need people that are, not afraid of rejection, that are motivated, that are hardworking, and that also want to get along and have fun, because at the end of the day, business is business, work is work is hard, especially at a startup. But if everyone has the right attitude around being successful, that's the best thing you could do. Another thing for leaders, I would say, remember that you are the example and that everyone else in the organization is watching you and they're playing off of your energy. So especially in a small company or small office where there's no cubicles, everyone can see each other, they can feel your energy and they know, they being others in the organization that may not be founders. So be cognizant of that. And also don't forget to be nice to people. Like, one of the best things you can do is just say, like, thank you. I appreciate your work. Let's go get a beer. Like, connect with the people. Like, you're stressed, you're busy, you're scared about the future of the company. Like, these things happen, and even though you're wearing that, making that evident to people on your team can make them feel like, wow, if that guy's worried, maybe I should be worried. And that shouldn't be the case. It's funny, I was reading this stat that said, like, entrepreneurs or it wasn't CEOs, founders, specific word used, like, suffer from higher rates of depression, anxiety, et cetera, than non-insert label or title here, right? So that being said, work is tough, and as long as you're creating a fun environment, I think it's easy to look at, like, even if you are going to miss your sales target by 10%, don't beat up the sales team, especially if revenue grew 30% over quarter. They didn't get that last 10%, but guess what? If you beat them up, they're not going to feel excited about beating goal next quarter. So just remembering to keep a positive attitude and have a positive work environment, I think, goes a long way.
Yeah, and along your point, obviously sales teams at startups get very, very aggressive growth goals year over year or quarter over quarter. And so sometimes they are missed. That is the reality of it. And I think it is, saying, hey, we missed, but here's the path to success for the next quarter, and owning it, but then also, being optimistic and showing a very clear path as to here are the 5 things that are going to get done in order to help us get there.
Yep.
And I agree with you. I think sales culture is so important at a company, and it can really make or break things. And so what do you define as a healthy sales culture, and what's your ideal sales culture that you try to build out for your team?
Yeah, it's a culture. I like to build out a feedback culture. And even though feedback isn't necessarily, a fun party, I think it's cool because you know where you stand and you don't have this feeling in your chest every day at work around what's happening. It also means, like, if people are giving you feedback, it's because they care. Away from that, though, from a sales standpoint, I mean, when my team beats goal, we go out. We did like a outing at one of those regular New York City comedy clubs because we're balling on a budget. And we go there and they're like, oh yeah, we've got this special guest tonight. It's Jerry Seinfeld. And everyone's like, yeah, right, it's Jerry Seinfeld. And it was Jerry Seinfeld. And it was amazing. And we paid like $5 a person for these tickets. And I think when you're at a startup, it's not about having like this flashy, crazy experience. I think the people that are there want to spend time together. And even if it's something small like, beers in the office and then to the comedy show.
Yeah.
Like, and if Jerry Seinfeld didn't come there, it would still be awesome. You know what I mean? Because we're all together, we're out of the office, we're having fun, and then we had a fun dinner after that. So I like to reward, good behavior and wins, but I also I don't want to say I want to reward misses, but hey, look, if we do miss a quarter, look at the progress we made. Like, let's highlight the things that specific salespeople did to help us get there. Wow, how do we replicate that? I had an offsite for my team maybe, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, where we spent, 4 hours. We had this great setup, and we just went over so many different parts of sales. And it wasn't about me. It was my team saying, like, if we had to talk about what makes a great salesperson, they list out 6 things. One of them, strong communication skills. What are strong communication skills? What does that look like? What do you do specifically, X person? And now people are sharing, collaborating, because I, like a lot of sales leaders, might make the assumption that just because these sellers sit literally 3 feet away from each other all day, every day, they have to be collaborating and talking about their sales style. And no, they're not, because they're on the phone with clients. They're out at client meetings. Like, everyone's doing what they have to do to hit their goal. So I think it's important for sales leaders, founders, whoever, to remember to bring everybody into a room and have them talk.
Definitely, yeah. And I think it's funny because looking back now, I still remember when we started this office in New York, it was, just 2 people, and now we've scaled to 40. But I remember those like comedy club days. We got a Z's though instead of Jerry's.
There we go.
Maybe 1 notch down, but now, I mean, it's more of creating that environment of like, hey, we're all in it together, and collaboration, even though salespeople by nature are very, very competitive. And it's, as the organization grows and the sales team matures, I think it's really fun just to like look back and be like, hey, remember when? Perfect example is right now we're at a WeWork. We've completely outgrown it. There's 40 of us in a 30-person space. We're negotiating a lease for our first office in New York that's not a WeWork, and it's going to take a month or 2 to get there. And our founders are looking at it, they're like, you guys are going to look back at this and laugh and enjoy this like one day. So I think just that culture and that mentality of like, hey, we're all in this together is really important. We only have a few minutes left, so I do want to make sure to ask a few more of the questions from Slido. And I want to ask this question because I'm actually curious too.
Sure.
Where do you find good salespeople?
So I'll use the 2 that I hired. They both actually came from startups, and I'm not saying that a good salesperson can't come from a larger organization, but the 2 that I hired did come from smaller companies. I found their backgrounds to be attractive just because when you're at a company, and this isn't to say that Nextdoor doesn't have strong brand recognition, because I'm sure most of you know about Nextdoor, but you need salespeople that are used to going in the door as an underdog and having a history of closing deals. I don't care if they're doing that by leveraging their personal network, if they're really good at value selling, if they're really good at pitching. Like, I don't care what it is, because I want every salesperson to be different, but being able to go in to the New York City advertising market, knocking on these agencies' doors, getting meetings, crushing the meeting and getting deals, and then successfully renewing, I think that is way more valuable than someone coming into interview and saying, well, I've covered all of these blue chip brands and I've managed the relationship and I've done it for years, just because that sounds like a comfortable person to me. And on my team, I want someone that's aggressively running at every account and trying to close as many deals as possible. So that's attractive to me. I'm sure that I came from a larger company, and I think I'm doing an okay job at leading the East Coast at Nextdoor. So there definitely are people at larger organizations that can hustle. But I just think when you're hiring for a startup, hire people that are ready to grind, hustle, and have fun doing it too.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think at Branch, we definitely see people have a higher success rate on the AE side if they have startup experience versus purely large company experience. And I remember when I was first starting this office, we did not have budget for a recruitment team or anything like that. Underdog.io is a great newsletter that's out there. General Assembly, your own networks, personal networks posted on LinkedIn. Those are all fantastic places to start that don't cost a lot of money or are free. Another interesting question. So, and I think a lot of companies has faced this in the startup side is, you're looking to make your first VP of sales hire.
Yeah.
What is the DNA of that person? Is it, because you see a lot of startups bring in, VPs of sales that have been at the Oracles or the Salesforces of the world.
Yeah.
Do you do that, or do you, look for a sales leader that's had, a company and brought it from 0 to 10 million ARR?
Yeah. I think it depends on where your company is, because startups change. And the company that a certain startup may have been when there were 10 people is very different from the company it's going to become when it's 150 people and needs a VP of sales. If your company is a company that has a rockstar rockstar product, but maybe doesn't have the relationships across the space to get meetings, be connected, maybe you want that kind of VP of sales. Let's say you are at a company where relationships are great, but you need someone who's actually being very strategic around product innovation, improving the product, and making sure you're growing overall revenue, because that's different from someone who is connecting from a relationship standpoint. I believe as you move higher up in sales leadership, closing deals and managing the team isn't as important as revenue diversification, meaning the different lines of business within the company, client diversification. So if let's say you have a tool or product that can be used by any vertical, if all of your clients are financial institutions and there is an economic shock that impacts financial institutions, you're too leveraged to that industry. So how do you think about diversifying that part of your client mix? So I think those types of things are important, just having a strategic sales leader that's thinking about the business as a business as opposed to sales and deals, because the regional sales manager and the sales team are on that. So how are you leveling them up and growing the organization from a revenue standpoint?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think I've seen a lot of startups make that mistake of hiring VPs of sales, regardless of what company they come from, that aren't used to thinking strategically, where when they're in that leadership role, everything's thought out. Commissions are owned by the sales operations team. How is the comp structure figured out? How are upsells handled? Those have already been decided when they've entered said company. And so when it comes to actually building it from scratch, they don't know where to start. And I think the number two, common sales mistake I've seen at sales orgs is just oh, we need more revenue, let's just hire more salespeople. Not the way to go.
No.
All right, and we're just about out of time, so one last question for you.
Sure.
So, this is an interesting one. So, what do you think the best tactics are for accelerating sales once you've made the first few hires?
Well, I think I'm a big fan of, once you've made the first few hires, I think it's important once you have your team to figure out what your team stands for. What's the team culture? What's our mission? And what are we going to do as a unit? Because once you make hires, one person joins, the next one joins 3 months later, the next one joins 3 months later. They're not all on the same page because they joined the organization during different parts of its life, and no one's really come together to say, okay, this is our plan of attack, this is our strategy. So I think when that comes up, to accelerate sales, you should probably talk to the salespeople and ask them, so what kind of clients do you enjoy covering? When do you have the highest likelihood of success? Because if you can align people with these sort of clients, verticals where they can shine, I think that that's better than giving them a random mix of accounts where they are not motivated, not necessarily enjoying it, and then only giving a certain amount of effort. But if you put everything out on the table, ask everyone what they want, let them understand you're probably not going to get everything you want, but you might get 80% of what you want, which is better than the random case where everyone's getting, you know, you said 5 salespeople, so 20% of what they want, and now no one's happy. So I think that would be a great way to accelerate sales, and also rewarding success, whether that's through I don't know, gift cards or through outings and happy hours and things like that. I think it goes a long way. Obviously, like I said early, verbally saying to people thank you and that you appreciate them goes a long way. I think that those are the things that just gets people fired up and makes them excited about coming into work every day.
Yeah, hopefully once they've tasted that success, continuing to feed that and making sure that they're motivated to have more of it.
Yeah.
Right? All right, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.